Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome to the Aerospace Industry Business After Hours, presented by the New England Air Museum and hosted by IT Direct. I'm Ari Santiago, CEO and President of IT Direct, technology success provider here in Connecticut. We work with manufacturers to help them on things like cybersecurity, CMMC for DoD contractors and general hygiene, as well as help companies who are looking for an IT support structure that better aligns their technology with their business needs. I'm also the host of the Made in America podcast. It's an amazing podcast, really bringing knowledge and awareness about manufacturers in Connecticut with two primary goals. One is to really re-engage the community and engage them in the value and the vibrancy of manufacturing in Connecticut, as well as to provide a platform for peer learning where we can engage and help each other grow and succeed. It's really been a privilege of mine to host that podcast. I'm really excited about that. So if you take a look at the information about the podcast and the handouts from tonight's event. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going on the technology side. Everybody's mic is going to be on mute now and throughout the entire presentation. That said, please feel free to ask questions. You'll see a question topic in the right-hand side panel. You can open up that questions and please put in questions throughout the entire presentation. Patrick's going to go ahead and answer those at the very end. Also, you're going to see PowerPoint slides. You probably right now see a slide, and then above it is my video. If you want to see more of the video, you can click that bar right below it and pull it down. Or if you want to see the slide larger, you can click that bar and bring it up, and we'll enlarge the PowerPoint as we're going through it. Finally, you may have some connectivity or audio problems. If you start to have the audio gets choppy, you'll notice in the bar of the GoToWebinar that there's an option on the audio panel to be able to dial in. So if you click on audio, you can choose phone audio. It'll give you a phone number to dial in. Just be aware, if you click that, you will not hear our audio in the time between you click it until the dial-in is completed, but once called in, you'll be able to hear everything. With that said, I'm really excited to hear what Patrick has to say about this changing environment and what those of us in the aerospace industry need to do to adapt and succeed throughout it. So Ron, take it away, my man.
Thanks, Ari, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second now webinar series in our Aerospace Industry Business After Hours series. We're really happy to have a great speaker, a great well-known Connecticut businessman speaking this evening, Patrick Dempsey, who will be with us in just a moment to share his perspective on the aerospace industry. Just a few comments first. I want to thank IT Direct and Ari Santiago, who you just heard from a moment ago, for hosting this webinar tonight, and for all the technical support and guidance. We don't have that kind of expertise on our staff, so they've stepped in and they've been able to make this webinar and the last one possible, and we appreciate that. Also want to thank our sponsors tonight. We have KeyBank supporting this program. KeyBank also supports a special program at the New England Air Museum where veterans get to visit for free every day, which is great. We appreciate that. Robinson Cole, a law firm with an aerospace supply chain practice, very supportive of the Air Museum and supporting this program tonight. New England Airfoil Products, an international company in aerospace with a home right here in Farmington, Connecticut. And of course, our friends at Barnes Group, a longtime supporter of the New England Air Museum. We appreciate all of their support for this program tonight. Tomorrow is a really important day, and everybody knows that museums across the state and across the world, around the world, have been closed for a while. The New England Air Museum is going to be reopening. And to tell you a little bit more about that and other things that are going on at the New England Air Museum these days, I want to introduce Mr. Scott Ashton, President of the Neem New England Air Museum Board of Directors.
Thanks, Ron, and good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us at the New England Air Museum Aerospace Business After Hours event tonight with Barnes Group President and CEO Patrick Dempsey. I'm Museum President Scott Ashton, and again, I want to recognize our sponsors for hosting tonight's event, and I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Our Business After Hours events are normally great networking events in a terrific venue surrounded by beautifully restored aircraft for inspiration for that night's speech. Like all of you, we've had to adapt, and we have actually seen some unexpected benefits of our virtual events, and that the reach of the program tonight now is able to go far beyond the state. And I think we've got people on from all around the country watching the event tonight. An update on the museum. For several weeks, our outdoor exhibits have been open to the public. As Ron mentioned, tomorrow is a big day for us as our hangars will be open to the visitors for the first time in months. And I want to recognize the work of our great staff and volunteers in getting us ready to serve the public again. We're very excited about that. And when our visitors do come tomorrow, they're going to see some improvements to the museum. We took the opportunity to clean, paint, and begin work on our newest exhibit celebrating New England women in aviation. The fundraising has continued as well, with the museum raising over $100,000 in recent months to support the deployment of technology in our accredited STEM programs, including a $50,000 matching grant from the Ray Foundation that will be used to purchase a Redbird flight simulator to introduce students to flying with a much higher fidelity FAA-approved simulator. We've also been awarded an additional grant from the Command Family Foundation to augment our exhibit celebrating the life and accomplishments of Charlie Command. So even with the pause we've had to take, there are still many exciting things going on here at the New England Air Museum. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you're able to come visit the New England Air Museum soon and that life gets back to some semblance of normalcy. And now on to our speaker, Patrick Dempsey. Patrick is President and Chief Executive Officer of Barnes Group. His career spans over 40 years of experience in global manufacturing across a diverse range of aerospace and industrial end markets. With a laser focus on profitable growth, Barnes Group has transformed its business portfolio under Patrick's strategic leadership through key investments that include multiple long-term and life-of-program aerospace partnerships on the next generation of aircraft and a series of industrial technology-based acquisitions into differentiated growth markets such as medical devices, packaging, and automation. Patrick joined Barnes Group in 2000 to lead the company's aerospace aftermarket business. He was later appointed a company officer and president of Barnes Aerospace, expanding his responsibilities to include both the OE, production, and aftermarket segments. In 2007, Patrick was promoted to president, Barnes Distribution, to lead the company's expansion of its North American and European distribution businesses. And in 2012, he was promoted to Chief Operating Officer and President, Barnes Industrial. And with that resume, Patrick is well equipped to lead Barnes through this very challenging and trying time, and we're going to hear now how he's doing that. Patrick, thank you.
Okay, show my screen. And I'll put this on. Good. Hopefully you can see that screen.
Yeah,
And,
Patrick, it's looking great, man. 5x5.
Lovely, thank you. So welcome and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. Thank you, Scott and Ron, for the invite, and of course, all the great work that the New England Air Museum does in terms of promoting our industry. We appreciate it. So with that, I appreciate the fact that you've all joined this evening, and of course, I am also adapting to the life of the digital world, as now I give a presentation to almost 100 people without being able to look you in the eye, but I am clearly looking forward to it. So let me start by highlighting what I would like to talk about this evening in terms of an agenda. First and foremost, just talking about the overall impact of COVID-19 on our industry and the macroeconomic impact that it's had. It really, truly has been a perfect storm for the travel sector and causing major disruption, as we all know, to the aerospace industry. But as that impact has taken hold, of course, it's now trickling downstream to the supply chain and to each one of our businesses. You know, on the assuming that most folks on the call are in the industry or in manufacturing, and so as we adapt, as we always do, I'd like to talk a little bit about what maybe preparing for the future means. And so with that, I'll kick it off into just where we are today. So I think it's interesting to begin with the fact, and I put it, lest we forget. Not only a few months ago were we talking about an industry that was riding on the top of the wave, so to speak. We were all enjoying what had been, one of really long cycles and up cycles for the industry, and the revenue passenger growth was continuing to look promising. With, as you can see here in this particular slide, every 15 years approximately, revenue passenger miles in terms of world traffic was doubling. And so we closed out 2019 at almost 9 trillion revenue passenger miles. But then, of course, as we marched into the second half of the first quarter, COVID-19 clearly wreaked havoc on our industry and on the macro economy in total. What we saw in terms of the S&P 500, as an example, it hit an all-time high in mid-February, and by mid-March had dropped almost 35%. And so just a significant impact to the markets. And all the while, the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases continue to climb. Even with this chart now, it's out of date in that the number has climbed over 8 million confirmed cases. But with all of that, of course, the outlook where we had started the year with some, low single-digit growth projections for GDP, which was not great, but wasn't bad in the fact that it was positive. Very quickly, that turned, as you can see, negative for nearly all the regions of the world, and clearly turned on a dime in terms of our outlooks. More significant, I think, was just what happened in the first quarter with respect to U.S. employment trends. We went from record lows to record highs. An interesting, stat in the month of April, the U.S. economy lost an unprecedented 20 million jobs just in 1 month. And so, we'd gone from a 50-year low at the end of 2019 of approximately 3.5% to 14.7% by the end of April. Just staggering in terms of the speed at which the rate of change occurred. But also then, what we saw was the disruption to what had been a great aero cycle coming to a screeching halt, unfortunately. The International Air Transport Association, IATA, actually was quoted as saying 2020 may very well be the worst year in the history of aviation. And so that maybe captures, for all of us, the extent at which the industry was impacted. And what we saw was no geographic region was spared. To the right of this graph, just for depiction, what you see is that a sea of red in terms of year-over-year declines in passenger traffic, passenger capacity, and load factors. So, in summary, a perfect storm for the travel sector. Previous crises, I would suggest, had 1 or 2 major factors that were driving the drop in demand, but COVID-19 was unique and is unique in that it is a much more complicated and far-reaching negative impact on the industry. What I would say is that previous crises have all demonstrated recoveries along a V or U-shaped, but here the jury's still out as to what the impact of COVID-19 is going to result in. What we saw in terms of our airports and the travel industry overall was we went from heavy congestion to the airports being deserted. A staggering number in terms of people traveling through TSA checkpoints every day. In April, the actual daily number went below 90,000 people in a day, from the previous year being a range of 2.2 to 2.5 million a day. And so again, a 95% drop in a year on a year-over-year basis. And so, you know, it just amplifies the extent at which the industry was hit. And as a result, with that lack of travel by the flying public, airplanes had to be grounded the world over, with almost 60% of the fleet being grounded, which was approximately 15,000 aircraft. And in that, both wide body and narrow body were impacted. In the bottom right here, you can see that the large aircraft or the 4-engine aircraft were almost grounded in their entirety. The A380 being the first bar there on the left, highlighting that 100% of the fleet was grounded, followed by the 747, which was almost 90%. And of course, what the airlines had was a major challenge in how to park all these aircraft, and that in itself was a logistical challenge. And such, as you can expect, the impact on the airlines also devastating, where they had enjoyed a number of years in nice profitability. IATA just recently came out and suggested that losses this year will be in excess of $85 billion. And so almost, you know, a decade lost in terms of what is going to be the drop in revenue passenger miles in the space of almost 2 months. So again, the industry right now is burning cash at a very high rate. Expected to burn approximately 60 billion just in Q2 alone. And of course, revenues have dropped almost 50% as well, with the industry expecting to be around 400 billion for the year. And as the airlines suffered, then of course the aerospace OEMs, you know, did as well, with the necessity of halting production at both Boeing and Airbus. And of course, here we saw major assembly lines, you know, ground to a halt, and a big question mark in terms of what does the future hold in terms of returning production, turning it back on, and then at what levels of our production rates will it come back. And that, of course, leads us to talk about what are the implications down through this supply chain. We've gone from what has been record production rates and backlog to now massive production rate cuts. The A320neo as an example, Airbus has been a little bit more forthcoming with its projections against new rates, with the successful narrow body A320neo looking at approximately 40% reductions. It wasn't, again, just about a few months ago, we were planning on how it was possible to get to rates of 65, 70, 75 narrow bodies a month. And the industry was literally creaking with the strain of thinking about how to get there. And of course, now a very different story as we're looking at literally, you know, 40% less to what we were actually doing. And this slide also just depicts what might be the rate of recovery as you look out, you know, quarter by quarter and into 20 and 21. But a big question I think that remains, whilst we may receive outlooks to what production rates may be in the coming months and over the next year, what really I think in the short term is going to be a challenge is inventory in the supply chain and how long it's going to take for that to work its way through so that we actually do get to a normal run rate going forward. So as you can imagine, in the interim, for every business, cash is king, and all businesses are looking to preserve liquidity and take the necessary steps to strengthen their balance sheets. Depending on your exposure to a particular OEM platform, there's no commercial supplier that's immune from the impact to the current in the current environment. And here you just see some of the different major suppliers to both Boeing and Airbus and their exposure to the different platforms. So again, whilst every platform has been impacted, your concentration in one particular platform and another may very well dictate the extent to which your business is impacted. So defense, the only safe haven, at least for now, and what we can look to now with with a positive attitude is the fact that the 20 to 2021 budget forecast for the DoD is flat, and so in the current environment, flat is good, I guess, given the extent to which commercial was impacted. But I would also just highlight, though, that in times of economic crisis, governments aren't immune to cutting spending on aerospace and defense contracts as well. So time will tell here as we move forward. And so as the markets were impacted and commercial and defense were impacted, the stock market followed suit. And so here you see the last 12 months of performance, with investors putting their money also where they see a brighter future. And so defense stocks up 11% on a 12-month trailing 12 months, whilst aerospace commercial down almost 32%. And this is probably one of the most painful charts that I put together, because we went from a war on talent to widespread layoffs, and all in the space of 60 days. We last year and for the last few years as an industry, what workforce development had been one of the most significant issues for us, wondering where we were going to get those qualified workers, how we were going to continue to attract talent to the industry. And from that to now, as I said, widespread layoffs with every OEM and most businesses within the supply chain announcing layoffs over the last few weeks, and will be doing so over the next coming months. And again, no aspect of the industry, was untouched, with even M&A deals being reassessed. Two of the larger announcements that were made were mergers of equals, with one of those merger of equals being successful in the closing of Raytheon and United Technologies in the beginning of April, whilst on the other hand, a second was terminated between Woodward and Hexcel, again because of the amount of turmoil in the industry and the fact that the pathway to achieving the synergies that had previously been announced became unclear. And so both businesses agreed that it was in the best interest of their companies and shareholders to terminate the deal. So what does the future hold? This becomes the $64 million questions. Having addressed the various impacts of COVID-19 on the economy the aerospace sector, and the implications for the supply chain, let me now try to maybe take a stab at this question. So let me start by saying, I guess, that there's a wide variation in the number of projections and the rate of recovery. How fast the industry will recover is really going to be a direct correlation to the assumptions on how fast passenger traffic will recover. What you can see is a wide spread in terms of the variation of different analysts depicted in this particular slide as to the rate, whether it's a V-shaped, U-shaped, L-shaped. I mean, all of those projections are on the table. And yet, I think what everybody agrees with is the fact that, domestic travel will recover quicker than international travel. And the primary reason being that, travel restrictions between countries still is an open question. And, different governments will make their own decisions as to when to lift those travel restrictions. And of course, all of those are going to be based on whether they contain or whether the virus continues to spread. So clearly the resilience of the industry has been tested once again. But the good news is that the commercial airline market has over the years proved resilient in past crises, many of which have been depicted here on this slide. And the recovery has usually been in a 1 to 3 year time frame. Again, the question becomes, will COVID-19 and its impact, allow the industry to recover in the same time period? And so, as we've discussed, it's clearly a number of different factors at play, and with that, we're going to continue to move forward. But first and foremost, of course, what we have to do is reverse this picture, which I showed earlier, and move passenger travel back into the airports. And to do that, the flying public must feel safe. So I think a challenge that we have as an industry is, how do we instill confidence into the flying public? And so, to that end, I think we as an industry have to put our collective thoughts together. And, this industry has been built on technology, built on innovation. And to that end, I expect that we will, push through this particular crisis and come up with some, creative solutions to instill that confidence back into the flying public. Whether that's from check-in, the use of widespread thermal monitoring, the use of whether we have to now prove that we have immunity to COVID-19, to a picture here which I thought was interesting, a fogging station, whether we as travelers might need to walk through something to be disinfected in terms of our luggage and our individual bodies. So these are, some of the challenges that we're going to face, and some of the solutions on our, innovations that I think the industry is going to have to step up to answer. Again, all with a view to instilling confidence that once you step on a plane, that you're not compromising your health in doing so. Also, I think the onboard experience may have to change. These are some creative, depictions of different, types of seating arrangements. One of the, greatest topics of that gets a lot of discussion is whether the middle seat should actually be, remain empty, so that at least there's that distancing between you and the passenger next to you. The challenge there, I think we have as an industry, is the fact that the average airline needs in excess of 75% load factor to just break even. And if we take out that middle seat, it says load factors will drop, to 60, 66%. And with that, every airline flying will be unprofitable. So herein lies the challenge to the industry. How do we ensure people feel safe on the aircraft? And at the same time, the economics have to work. The alternative, of course, is that airfares rise. And to that end, the estimations are that they'd have to rise in excess of 50% over the current averages just for the airline to break even. The other trend that I think all of us have become somewhat familiar with, and is the fact that corporate travel is a huge part of the profitability of this industry, and in particular the airlines. And over the last few months, I think it's fair to say that every one of us have adopted to not traveling where we would have done it almost weekly beforehand. And so the introduction and the familiarization of all corporate America and corporate worldwide to digital technologies that have been the alternative, if they continue to take hold, it may actually have some secular impact on business travel as we move forward. Within our operations, I also believe it's fair to say that whilst we worked through the last few months and the challenges that it brought, we also saw some of the vulnerabilities to our own businesses. And of course, as the supply chain is spread globally, transportation as well as manufacturing with social distancing in mind put pressure on all of our businesses. But one of the trends that I think is going to continue to really accelerate as a result of COVID-19 will be a focus on automation. And whilst a lot of us have adopted it already, I think it'll only increase its investment as we move forward. So a last slide in terms of just some challenges to consider is what's going to be the outcome of future cost pressures if we have to fly at lower load factors. Is it going to drive industry consolidation? Will some airlines, some have already declared bankruptcy? Will the government bailout programs, which now are in excess of 120 billion globally, will that ultimately put a burden of debt on the airlines to where ultimately some will end up being nationalized again? And as we think about sanitizing aircraft between flights, will that deep cleaning and the costs associated with it and the time to do it actually be the end of cheap travel as we know it? And at the same time, for those that are fortunate enough to be able to afford it, we may actually see an uplift in the business jet sector as people look to fly on less crowded aircraft. So given my presentation overall might suggest there's no shortage of challenges in aerospace, I do want to share my last slide as a look to the fact that long-term macro trends are still favorable. So even though in the here and now we're absolutely adjusting real time to the challenges of the industry, the long-term outlook for the industry remains very positive over the long term. And so here you can see that over the last 10 years, we've been growing in terms of the number of global passengers. They've been growing at a rate of 7%. Going forward, it's projected that total number of travelers that traveled in 2019 was approximately 4.5 billion worldwide. And the outlook by 2037 is that to double again. So again, you ask, what are the drivers? The drivers remain the same, which is the projected rise of the middle class worldwide. And then as developing countries continue to lift more and more into the middle class, immediately people want to travel. So I don't think travel's going away. Clearly, right now, leisure travel will be the first, I think, to rebound, followed shortly thereafter by, corporate travel. And of course, one of the drivers of aircraft demand has been, without travel, has been the rise of low-cost carriers. And I think that trend will continue as well. So to conclude, just in summary, I think the economic impact will determine the future of the aero sector, not necessarily the virus, because the virus, as we all want to hope and wish for, will find a vaccine. And once it does, people will come back to fly. But the real question in the short term is, what is the economic impact going to mean to the airline industry? I think that we're going to continue to see realignment within the supply chain, particularly the larger tier ones and OEMs may clearly move into M&A mode and look to not only fortify their supply chain, but also have to step in to save some of the weaker players that may fall by the wayside. The consumer confidence, as I mentioned, will be the key determining factor to getting airplanes back into the skies, because we have to, as an industry, restore that confidence. And so I, again, haven't been involved in the industry for the last 20 plus years. I would suggest that the outlook remains bright, and we will be resilient, and we will pass through this period of time, as daunting and as challenging and as it is. So that concludes my my presentation.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That was a lot of information and a lot for us to think about, and very, very well presented. I especially like the fact that you ended on a high note.
Always a good thing.
While we're waiting for people to type in their questions, and I'll just remind people that in your in the box on your screen, there's a line that says questions, and you can just go there and type in any questions that you have, and we'll convey them to Patrick. But I'm just going to toss one out. I've actually wrote down a number of questions while you were talking, specifically thinking about here in Connecticut. And I know that Barnes is a global company, and you're looking at what's going on around the world. But here in Connecticut, how long would you expect the ripple effect to take place? For example, once airline travel starts to pick up a little bit, the airlines start booking more flights, how long will it take for that to ripple through for the manufacturers to feel any kind of improvement from that?
Ron, it depends on where your business is focused. So as you probably are aware, Barnes is a both new manufacturing supplier as well as a provider of overhaul and MRO services. So with that, I think there may be a little bit more clarity to the new production side, in that the rates are going to adjust downward almost immediately to the lower demand experienced by the industry. From a new production standpoint, I think it'll be at least 2 to 3 years before we might get back to some of the rates that we were experiencing in 2019. Of course, it's it depends on the platform, as I mentioned, that any one business is focused on, whether that's an Airbus platform or a Boeing platform, whether it's a Rolls-Royce engine or whether it's a Pratt & Whitney engine or a CFMI engine. Each has a determinant factor, but I think we're talking about a few years. More of the wild card that I think everybody is speculating on right now is the aftermarket, and how long or how protracted maybe the recovery will be there.
And again, thinking locally as an economy, do you see Connecticut's economy rebounding more slowly as a result of the fact that so much of the manufacturing is focused on aerospace, or do you think that the economy is diversified enough that that won't be an issue?
I think it will be from a Connecticut standpoint. I believe that it's going to be a few years as well. I don't see clearly on a consumer basis, with the reopening of Connecticut today into phase 2, we'll see a pickup from that. And of course, everything's relative, as I say, because everything comes from where the bottom was. And I think we've really hit the bottom across many industries in the second quarter. And so as economies start to open back up, as Connecticut starts to open back up, we're going to see an uplift. Retail numbers, for the month of May were very positive, again, relatively speaking, up in the high teens. And so as people start to move out of their homes, back into the malls, back into the airports, Connecticut will be the benefactor, as will the wider economy.
Hey, Ron, I'll jump in with another question. Patrick, I'm going to give you maybe a twofer, because Lloyd Prout kind of has two questions that are not necessarily interrelated, but I think important. The first one is, what's your opinion of the short-term and long-term outlook for the 737 MAX and getting kind of that back on track? And more specific to your factories, if you could just follow that up with, what is Barnes doing relating to testing employees for COVID-19, just in terms of keeping production moving forward?
Sure, great. Well, addressing your first question on the 737 MAX, clearly a significant challenge to Boeing and to that particular platform as a result of the two, very unfortunate catastrophic accidents. What I do believe is that it's taken longer than anyone expected to have the airplane recertified, with it now, going into, well over a year. The aircraft, I believe, will successfully be recertified. It will enter back into production after its stoppage in the first quarter, and I do believe over the long term it'll be a very successful platform. To that end, we are clearly a participant as Barnes Group on the aircraft via the LEAP engine, which it's exclusively powered by. And so over the next months, we expect that it'll be one of the bright spots in terms of growth as a platform goes, because it's coming from no production to a steady ramp over the coming quarters. With respect to Barnes, I'm proud to say that our employees were deemed as, and our businesses were deemed as essential throughout the entire coronavirus. And so we remained open for the full period of the last number of months. With that, we have gone, our first and foremost priority was the health and safety of our employees. And we've taken significant measures across our facilities and our operations to protect our employees. Anything from, the deep cleaning of the facilities, to staggered shifts, to close in our break rooms and any areas that were, common areas for people to gather. All of those policies have been implemented. We've also now most recently implemented temperature checking and a questionnaire as each one of our employees come into the workplace. Of course, if anybody is feeling unwell, we ask them to stay away and stay home till they feel better. And so multiple measures been taken across the globe. And because we are global, actually Barnes has been dealing with this since January, because our operations in China were the first to take the impact. And as you know, it spread from, China into Europe and then hitting North America by mid-March.
Yep.
Great.
Ron?
Yes. So the next question is from somebody who I think you know, Bill Gannett, has asked, when do you see the aftermarket business bouncing back to 2019 levels?
The question was how long before I see it happening?
Correct.
It's an interesting question because there are multiple factors that play into it that I think will ultimately determine how quickly it rebounds. And many schools of thought in play. So to that end, right now what you have is, as I mentioned in my presentation, over 60% of the fleet grounded. And what the real question becomes is, how quickly will that fleet go back into service? And in particular, what aircraft in what sequence will go back in? As I mentioned, I think domestic travel will occur first. And as a result, that'll probably come in the form of narrow body aircraft. So in the case of Barnes, as an example, we have a heavy concentration in the narrow body, in particular on the CFM 56 engine, which powers the 737 exclusively and a large portion of the A320neo. So the question I think that's on everybody's mind is, what aircraft will not return? And will the airlines make decisions because they're cash starved to retire particular aircraft and or defer maintenance? And by deferring maintenance, I don't mean to jeopardize safety in any way, but moreover to utilize what are known as green engines, where they have time on them, and so they'll swap them in and out onto aircraft to put off the expense of maintenance or larger overhaul costs. So all that said, I think we're looking at least a year, and that's been optimistic. So recognize that we've effectively lost the summer travel season for 2020. So the summer is always the peak of travel for all airlines, and we've lost that effectively for 2020. So just to get back to a peak travel on a normal basis, the airlines have to wait till next summer. And in the meantime, of course, we're all, going to do everything possible to be prepared for to step up to that recovery.
Patrick, Stephen Perez is asking, in terms of corporate travel and related meetings, you mentioned it in your presentation. Do you have like a timetable that you're thinking for business or corporate travel to return to not even pre-virus levels, but just what he calls reasonable levels?
Yes, it's a great question. And of course, what I will tell you is the number one factor that's going to ultimately determine that is the lifting of restrictions internationally. Because, maybe I'm biased to Barnes, we do a lot of international travel. So because we're a global company, we have locations in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. And so the leadership team and the management team of Barnes, there's a significant amount of international travel. And so there really we're at the mercy of the different restrictions that have been placed by different governments. But again, I would like to believe that Q3 is going to see some of the skies open up and some of those restrictions lifted. I believe that we will start traveling domestically in the next couple, where some of our employees are already traveling, and we will continue to increase that again with all the safeguards in place in this period of the virus. And as I mentioned, I think the airlines themselves have a role to play in terms of ensuring to the best of their ability that they're making passengers and business travelers feel comfortable stepping onto planes. But that is a burden on, I think, everyone on this call who is in the industry to be ambassadors for driving reassurances into the flying public and to our own teams about how we travel safely as we move through this period.
So Patrick, we've got a couple more questions to ask, but before I do that, I just wanted to stop for a second and make a quick plug for all of the attendees who are on the phone on this call. In the middle of your screen right now, there's a website, and if you appreciate this kind of programming and want to help support the New England Air Museum to continue to provide programs like this, I'd encourage you to click on that link. It's on our website at neem.org, and if you're so inspired, make a donation to help support the museum and to help keep programs like this going. So again, just a quick plug, and now we go right back to the questions. Patrick, we have a question from Allison Perry, who was listening to what you said about the potential cost of airline travel being as much as perhaps 50% higher. Do you see that as a long-term effect, or is that something that's going to shift back to a more reasonable level at some point in the foreseeable future?
Well, the 50% higher that I referenced would be a direct correlation to if the airlines are choose to or forced to fly with the middle seats empty. So in other words, an airline is always going to look to maximize utilization of the aircraft, and to do that, the load factors have to be high. As I mentioned, the average airlines need the plane to be 75 to 80% full just to break even. Above that then constitutes profit. So in the case of if airlines have to fly with one seat, a third of their seats empty, you're talking about a load factor that can only be achieved of 67%. Depending on the configuration of seating on a wide body aircraft, believe it or not, that 67% goes lower into maybe 62, 63%, because if you have a 2-4-2, you have to empty the two seats in the middle. So these are the implications. And so the question is that for the airlines to remain profitable, they're going to have to raise airfares. But my 50%, reference to 50%, was just to get to break even, wasn't to make profit. So again, you might see in the short term airfares even increase, which seems counterintuitive to the industry as a whole, because usually how do you attract people onto the aircraft? Lower prices, lower airfares. So it's an interesting dilemma, and yet one that the industry is going to have to grapple with. Moreover, is the amount of debt that the airlines have taken on, even through the subsidies they've received. And of course, as I mentioned, the cash that they're burning through right now puts a question mark over whether all airlines will even, survive this period as we work through the coronavirus. The one bright light at the end of all of this is that remember that we're all very confident that a vaccine will be found. The question is how long before that happens. But once that vaccine is found, I believe, things will restore to, some aspect of normalcy. However, the question is, who will survive and who will thrive in the time period that it takes for that vaccine to come online.
So Patrick, I'm going to kind of turn to an interesting question from Robert Moore, talking about the growth in unmanned aircraft or UAVs, and sort of the stuff that surrounds that. Is that an area that Barnes has considered entering that field to reduce the effects of the economic crash? Is that a realistic thought process?
It's not. It's not an area that Barnes per se has put a lot of energy and resources into, and really the premise being, or it's going to be a long time in terms of the trends relative to the volumes, and Barnes tends to chase volumes. We look to put in. Using our enterprise system, we put in production lines that are driving after efficiency, and usually efficiency comes with volumes. And so as a result, it's not an area that we've focused on. Having said that, we do a lot of fabrication of military type products, and we specialize. Barnes is one of the world's largest producers of titanium superplastic forming, which of course has many applications. So we're always looking for new ways to employ those technologies or those capability sets, as we look for new ways to bring load into our shops, so to speak.
Patrick, we've got a question from Steve Gardner, who goes by the nickname Bubba, and he's a good friend of the New England Air Museum. I'll paraphrase this.
The helicopter guy.
I'm sorry?
See, the helicopter guy.
He's a retired GE turbine mechanic.
Okay, great.
So, he talks about that he used to see Barnes buildings in Windsor locks where you would overhaul ground power turbines like the GG4 Rolls-Royce engines, and he's wondering if that's a line of business that Barnes is still in.
We have, over the years, I would say we've dabbled, I'd call it dabbling in ground-based turbines. We still do it today, but not to any great extent. It's a small percentage of our business. Where we have the capabilities that lend themselves to cross over from aero to industrial-based turbines, we absolutely take full advantage of it. But historically, one of the great things about aerospace has been the barriers to entry and the necessary approvals required. And so over the years, we have, we've had experiences with industrial-based turbines, but I would never call it something that was a real successful venture for us.
So actually, we have an interesting question here, taking it in a little bit of a different direction, Patrick. But I'm actually personally interested to hear your answer on this. It's from Ken Katz, possibly no relation to Ron, who has an interesting question. He says the aerospace industry has repeatedly gone from boom to bust, and I think you even touched on that in your presentation. How can the industry sell potential employees that there's value in working in the industry? Is there, in fact, a value proposition in working in an industry which is unable to provide long-term employment stability?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a challenge for any industry that's cyclical in nature. I do think that as an aerospace industry, for a period of time, I think we forgot we were cyclical in that we had enjoyed such an upcycle for so long. Even as we reflect on 2008 and the Great Recession, it was but a blip to the aerospace industry. I mean, it took a little bit of a dip, but nothing of any significance in terms of new production, at least. And so I do think that we, as an industry, have the challenge of constantly attracting talent and selling the great careers that can be had in aerospace. A downside, of course, is the fact that it's clearly goes through cycles. But having said that, it's an industry, I think, that engenders excitement. It's a very fascinating industry. It's one which pushes the envelope of technology. It really, it's something that we spend a lot of time on in trying to promote. Even every year for the last 7 years in October, we bring in classes of high school students and give them tours of our facilities. We have our master crafts people and engineers give demonstrations to the students, all with a view to just opening their eyes and open their perspectives to what the airline or the aerospace industry offers. And so, you know, I guess no industry is perfect, but clearly I think it has a lot to offer, and a lot of great careers have been made on it.
Ron, I know we've been switch hitting, but can I throw one more in there real quick? Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead,
Patrick, so this is actually more of a personal thing, but you know, I was very fortunate a number of years ago to have a long conversation with Greg Hayes, and you know, he kind of engendered in me this idea about just the growth of the middle class globally. You know, when you look at what's happening in India and Asia, in Africa, that the long-term trajectory of the use of airplanes was just going north and north and north for as far as the eye can see. Clearly, nobody predicted a global pandemic, and as the saying goes, this too shall pass. Do you think that there's any long-term impact to the use of airplanes based on what you touched on about using technology to limit travel, or do you think in 3 years, you know, this will be but a memory and travel will be back to where it was before, plus all the new entrants into the middle class?
I'm absolutely in the camp of this too shall pass, and in another 3, if you look at the charts that I presented over longer periods of time, any one of the crises that occurred is just but a small little divot in the curve. And I firmly believe in another 10 years we'll look back and this will be a severe divot, but it'll be a short-term one nonetheless in the scheme of things. So as the modern society continues to push towards, you know, the middle class, I absolutely believe that as soon as people have discretionary spend, what's the first thing we all want to do with our families? We want to travel, we want to see different places, we want to, you know, explore the world. And to that end, Greg, who's a good friend of mine, absolutely we're both aligned in that. I think, you know, the people will want to travel, the macro trends will continue in terms of demographics. And even, you know, you look at where a lot of airline or aircraft orders came from over the last 10 years. It's been from emerging markets, and those emerging markets will continue to emerge. And as they do, people will want to travel.
Great. Patrick, I've got one last question for you, but before I toss it out, I just want to say I got a note here from Steve Bubba Gardner. He says, yes, that is him. He is the famous CH-54B flight engineer.
There you go.
Just wanted everybody to know that. Last question tonight comes from Clive Cunliffe from New England Airfoil Products in Farmington, one of our sponsors for this program. Clive asks, what's your view on component cost pressure, given that the available capacity in the supply chain is now in excess of demand in civil aerospace sector, and how do you envision that being managed?
So in the short term, I think there's going to be pricing pressure on the supply chain, and that pricing pressure is going to come because you've had so much capacity built up over the last number of years in anticipation of volumes and or production rates that now have been reduced, you know, by 40–50% in some cases. And so the capacity is in place, and yet the work isn't there. So clearly there's going to be, you know, a lot of price pressure, I think, that's going to come, a lot of, you know, resourcing of materials. There's going to be retired aircraft, which I think will ultimately, some of which will get broken down and parted out. And so that will put surplus material into the system, which again will compete with new spares. But in general, I think strength of particular suppliers, the size of particular suppliers, and the position they have on particular platforms will determine the forces that are at play for any given company. And I feel very confident that we're positioned with some great partnerships with our key customers. We're going to continue to look to support them throughout the thick and thin of this, and we will continue, I believe, to just grow from strength to strength once we pass through this current challenging period.
Wonderful. Well, Patrick, again, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I think your insights have been wonderful, and I hope everybody found the program to be informative. I want to ask everybody to stay tuned for information on our upcoming webinars. We'll have hopefully another program in September, and probably one more in November after that. So we've got an action-packed year. Reminder to everybody that the museum opens tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We'll be open from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 7 days a week for the remainder of the summer. So hopefully everybody will have a chance to get out and visit us at the museum. A lot of great aircraft to see, a lot of activities, all following all of the same COVID-19 social distancing and safety procedures that Patrick described for his employees as well. So again, thank you, Patrick. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to IT Direct and Ari for hosting this tonight. And hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Ron. Good night, Patrick.
Thank you.